Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. I am so thrilled to have you joining me today. We are going to do something really fascinating. We're stepping right into the highly charged, super polarized world of online political commentary to unpack exactly how independent creators construct their arguments. Specifically, we're looking at a recent viral breakdown from the channel 10 Minutes Late. This creator has built a highly partisan, deeply passionate argument all centered around perceived political double standards. Now, we aren't here to take sides. We're just here to unpack the anatomy of this argument, to see exactly how media framing works in real time.
Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to hit 4 main points: the UFC event debate, perspectives on government spending, monetization versus grift, and finally, contrasting White House events. Let's get right into it.
Okay, starting us off with Section 1, the UFC event debate.
So, every viral rant needs a spark, right? For this one, it was the buzz around Donald Trump planning to host a UFC event right on the White House lawn. The whole thing kicks off with a street interview where someone says, "I think the idea of it is pretty cool, but $60 million is kind of a lot of money." That specific financial rumor, the idea that taxpayer dollars were funding a massive fight night, is literally the match that lights the creator's entire commentary.
And Matt, notice how fast the creator jumps on that $60 million figure? He literally pauses the clip to issue a correction, aggressively pointing out to his audience that the UFC is supposedly footing the bill themselves, not the taxpayers. He basically calls out social media critics for reacting blindly without doing their homework on how the event is actually being paid for.
To really set the stage for his argument, the creator highlights these deeply polarized public reactions. On one hand, you've got critics calling it the stupidest thing, saying it's wildly inappropriate to have people beating each other up for a spectacle on the White House lawn. On the flip side, supporters are calling it an awesome event, saying there's nothing more American than UFC, and praising it as a very Trump move because, Americans are fighters. The creator uses this exact divide to establish a total cultural battleground.
Which brings us to Part 2, perspectives on government spending. Now here is the absolute core of his financial argument. He claims that the critics losing their minds over the UFC event were dead silent when the Biden-Harris administration, who he actually calls crooked, supposedly diverted funds away from American citizens. He lays it out like this: housing, clothing, stimulus checks meant for everyday Americans, or even reparations meant for Black Americans whose ancestors worked in cotton fields. He argues all of that was instead handed over to undocumented immigrants who, in his words, jumped the fence.
The whole thing boils down to this one powerful phrase he uses: selective hate and selective memory. That's his main thesis right there. He's arguing that the people outraged by Trump's UFC event are utter hypocrites because they supposedly just looked the other way when the opposing political party misallocated massive amounts of money. He uses this idea of selective memory to completely wave off the criticisms against Trump.
Moving right along to Section 3, monetization versus grift.
Here, the creator shifts gears and pulls up a clip from the daytime talk show The View. The hosts run through a whole laundry list of grievances against Donald Trump's merchandising efforts. They're criticizing him for slapping his face on items celebrating America's 250th anniversary, like passports and national park passes, and for selling branded gold coins. The hosts don't frame this as a business. They call it an endless grift driven by an insatiable need to monetize the American public and a narcissistic dysfunction that requires constant self-celebration.
To really hammer their point home, the talk show hosts zero in on one very specific number: $12,000. That is the actual retail price tag of a Donald Trump-branded gold coin that's being sold to his followers. They break down the math to show what they consider totally exploitative. They point out that while the coin sells for $12 grand, the actual value of a 1-ounce pure PF70 gold coin is really only around $4,500. So their argument is that supporters are shelling out nearly 3 times the gold's actual worth purely to have Trump's face on a coin for their own individual enjoyment. And to create a super sharp contrast to this supposed narcissism, the hosts bring up Joe Biden. They say, and I quote, "Joe Biden celebrated his 80th birthday in the White House with his family and loved ones and his favorite coconut cake." They use this image of a quiet, humble birthday with a coconut cake to paint Biden as a guy who doesn't need people bowing down to him or buying his merchandise, unlike Trump. But the creator of our source video completely rejects that framing. He flips it around and asks, wait, what is the real difference between these talk show hosts writing and selling books to their daytime TV viewers and Donald Trump selling coins to his followers?
He equates the two perfectly, framing both of them as simply investments. He argues that anyone who can create a product and leverage their audience's resources absolutely should do so, and he characterizes the host's critiques as nothing more than financial jealousy.
He doesn't stop there either. He actually goes directly after the host's credibility. He zeroes in on one host in particular who had previously called Trump a felon. The creator claims she completely stopped using that word after her own husband, who's a doctor, was allegedly busted by the FBI for insurance fraud and RICO charges. He uses this alleged legal drama as a kind of karma boomerang, basically arguing that these media figures have absolutely zero moral high ground to criticize Trump's business practices.
So we've unpacked how the creator handles the financial debates and media hypocrisy. But how exactly does he tackle the cultural arguments surrounding the White House?
Let's find out in our fourth and final section, Contrasting White House Events.
The creator really pushes back against the talk show hosts, claiming that a UFC event somehow desecrates the historically significant White House lawn. He sets up this direct, head-to-head visual comparison to cement his point. On one side, a Biden-Harris Pride Month picnic, and on the other, the proposed Trump UFC event. He points out how liberal critics on TikTok are totally losing their minds over the UFC idea, but somehow conveniently have total amnesia when it comes to the Pride event.
He actually plays a news clip that lays out exactly what happened at the Biden administration's gathering. It marked Pride Month on the South Lawn, welcomed the LGBTQ+ community for a big picnic and concert, and featured the president praising the attendees' extraordinary courage. It also highlighted Pete Buttigieg and boasted about being the most pro-equality administration in history. The creator's point here is that the folks complaining about UFC fully supported this Pride event, with zero issues about it taking place on the White House lawn.
And that brings us to his highly charged, totally unfiltered conclusion. After cutting off the news clip of the Pride event, saying things had gotten out of control, he makes his preference starkly clear. He says, "I'd rather have a UFC event being hosted on the White House lawn any day over a gay transgender any day." It's a really stark declaration, but it's the ultimate culmination of his argument. For him, the UFC event represents a return to form, claiming Trump came in and turned it all around.
Which really leaves us with a massive question to think about. We've just mapped out how one independent creator uses selective comparisons from $60 million rumors and government spending, to coconut cakes versus gold coins, to pride picnics versus UFC fights, to build this intense narrative of hypocrisy. In today's highly polarized media environment, how do these selective comparisons and double standards shape our actual understanding of political controversies? When we're watching content online, are we getting the full picture, or just the specific puzzle pieces chosen to fit a narrative? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope this structured breakdown helped you cut right through the noise, and I literally can't wait to dive into the next topic with you.